The billionaire's 9-year-old son had never been able to walk until the maid sat beside him and did something no one imagined. Before we begin, I'd like to know a little about where you live. How's the weather there today? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to follow us for more content like this. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany dining table as 9-year-old Ethan Harrison sat in his wheelchair, his thin legs hidden beneath a soft blanket. His father, William Harrison, 44 years old and worth $50 billion, barely looked up from his phone while mechanically cutting his steak and reviewing merger documents. "Mr. Harrison," said Mrs. Peterson, her voice tight with concern. "The new therapist just arrived, Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah?" "She's here to cover Maria's position while she handles her mother's extended illness." Will grunted acknowledgement. This was their reality. A $40 million mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, filled with medical equipment and staffed by rotating specialists who'd all reached the same devastating conclusion about his son. Sarah entered quietly, her worn but clean clothes marking her as different from the expensive medical professionals who usually filled their home. At 28, she carried herself with quiet confidence, and when she spotted Ethan sitting alone at the massive table, something in her chest tightened with recognition. Unlike every other therapist who'd worked with Ethan, Sarah didn't introduce herself to Will first. She walked directly to the boy and, without asking permission, pulled out the chair next to him. "Hi there," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. What's your name?" Will's head snapped up, startled. In 5 years of rotating staff, no one had ever sat at the family table. "Ethan," the boy whispered, his blue eyes, identical to his father's, widening with surprise. Sarah smiled and reached for the salt shaker, deliberately knocking it over. Salt scattered across the polished wood. "Oops. My grandmother always said spilled salt brings good luck, but only if you make a wish and throw some over your left shoulder." She demonstrated, then offered Ethan some salt. "Want to try?" For the first time since his mother's death 5 years ago, Ethan genuinely smiled. He took the salt, closed his eyes tight, and threw it over his shoulder. "What did you wish for?" Sarah whispered. "I wished I could walk to get my own glass of water," Ethan said quietly, glancing nervously at his father. Will's fork clattered against his plate. In 9 years, his son had stopped expressing wishes about walking. Every doctor, every specialist, every second opinion he'd paid millions for had confirmed the same diagnosis: permanent paralysis due to severe spinal cord damage at birth. Sarah stood and extended her hand. "Well, wishes only work if you're brave enough to try. What do you say we give it a shot?" The dining room fell silent except for the antique clock's steady ticking. Will found himself holding his breath as Ethan, his precious son who hadn't attempted to stand in 3 years, slowly reached up and took Sarah's hand. 9 years earlier, William Harrison had been a different man. At 35, he'd built Harrison Industries from a small tech startup into a global empire, but his greatest pride was his pregnant wife Elizabeth, who was carrying their first child. The night Ethan was born, their world shattered. Complications during delivery left their son with what doctors described as severe spinal cord trauma. Elizabeth hemorrhaged and died 3 hours after holding her baby for the first and last time. Will remembered standing in that sterile NICU, holding his newborn son while Dr. Richard Whitfield, the head of pediatric neurology at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, delivered the devastating diagnosis. "The damage is extensive, Doctor," Whitfield had said, his voice professionally gentle. "Complete paralysis from the waist down. I'm afraid Ethan will never walk." What Will didn't know then was that Dr. Whitfield's diagnosis was influenced by more than medical evidence. The prestigious doctor, facing mounting malpractice insurance costs and a recent lawsuit over a misdiagnosis, had grown conservative to the point of pessimism. Rather than risk hope that might prove false, he erred on the side of devastating certainty. Over the following 9 years, Will spent over $15 million seeking second opinions from the world's best specialists. Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Boston Children's Hospital, every expert who reviewed Ethan's case agreed with Dr. Whitfield's initial assessment. The boy's extensive medical files, carefully compiled by Whitfield's team, presented such a consistent picture of permanent damage that no doctor questioned the original diagnosis. Will transformed his grief into business obsession, growing his fortune from millions to billions while Ethan grew up surrounded by physical therapists, occupational specialists, and adaptive equipment. The boy learned to navigate their mansion in custom wheelchairs, accepted his limitations with heartbreaking maturity, and slowly stopped asking when he might walk again. By age 6, Ethan had stopped trying. By 7, he'd stopped hoping. By 9, he'd become a polite, intelligent child who'd never known what it felt like to run, jump, or even stand on his own 2 feet. Dr. Whitfield continued as their primary neurologist, his reputation built partly on his realistic approach to pediatric disabilities. His practice thrived on families who preferred honest hopelessness to false encouragement, and the Harrison case had become a cornerstone of his philosophy. What none of them realized was that Ethan's real disability wasn't physical. It was the crushing weight of 9 years of being told he was broken. That first night after Sarah's arrival, Will found himself standing outside his son's bedroom, listening to voices he hadn't heard in years. Genuine laughter and animated conversation about favorite books, dream vacations, and what it might feel like to climb a tree. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, Will wondered if they'd all been wrong about something fundamental. Not about the medical diagnosis, that had been confirmed too many times to doubt, but about what was possible within those limitations. Sarah Mitchell brought qualifications that Mrs. Peterson's hiring notes had failed to capture. While her official role was companion therapist, her background included 3 years of physical therapy training, before financial circumstances forced her to leave school, plus 5 years of specialized experience in neurological rehabilitation. She'd worked as an aide at Hartford Rehabilitation Hospital, assisting patients recovering from strokes, spinal injuries, and traumatic brain injuries. Her last position had been caring for Eleanor Hartwell, a stroke survivor who'd regained mobility that doctors said was impossible, not through miracle treatments, but through patient, persistent work that addressed psychological barriers alongside physical ones. The body remembers what the mind forgets, Eleanor had taught Sarah. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing what's broken, but about remembering what was never really broken at all. Eleanor's recovery had taken 2 years of careful work, starting with small exercises disguised as daily activities. When Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep, she'd left Sarah enough money to return to school, but also a profound understanding of how hope and determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. On her second day with the Harrisons, Sarah observed Ethan during his scheduled physical therapy session with Marcus, a competent but uninspired therapist who'd been working with the boy for 2 years. Range of motion exercises, Marcus explained to Sarah as he moved Ethan's legs through prescribed stretches. Maintain muscle tone, prevent contractures, nothing more we can do, really. Sarah watched Ethan's face during the session, polite compliance masking complete emotional detachment. The boy had learned to endure therapy rather than participate in it. "Does anyone ever test for sensation?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus shrugged. "Kid's been paralyzed since birth. Dr. Whitfield's notes are clear about complete loss below L2 vertebrae." But Sarah noticed things that Marcus missed. Ethan's subtle facial reactions when his feet were positioned differently, the way his breathing changed during certain movements, the fact that he consistently pulled his blanket higher when the room was cold, as if he could feel the temperature change in his legs. That afternoon, while Ethan worked with his tutor, Sarah studied his medical files. 9 years of records, all confirming permanent paralysis, but something bothered her about the consistency. In her experience with neurological patients, recovery was messy, unpredictable, full of small improvements and setbacks. Ethan's files read like textbook cases, too clean, too definitive. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said that evening, "has Ethan ever been evaluated by anyone outside Dr. Whitfield's network?" "Mr. Harrison took him everywhere," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Boston, New York, even Switzerland. Every doctor agreed with Dr. Whitfield." "Did they examine Ethan independently, or did they review Dr. Whitfield's files?" Mrs. Peterson looked puzzled. "I believe they reviewed the medical records. Very thorough documentation. Dr. Whitfield is known for his detailed reports." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen this before. Cases where initial diagnoses became self-perpetuating because subsequent doctors relied on previous documentation rather than conducting fresh evaluations. That night, As she helped Ethan prepare for bed, she asked casually, "Ethan, when your legs are under the blanket, can you feel them getting warm?" Ethan looked confused. I think so? Sometimes I feel things, but Dr. Whitfield says my brain tricks me because I want to feel something." Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her voice calm. "What if your brain isn't tricking you? What if you really do feel things? But I can't move my legs. Have you tried recently? Really tried when no one was watching?" Ethan's silence was answer enough. The first breakthrough came during what appeared to be a routine bedtime story. Sarah was reading The Secret Garden when Ethan suddenly interrupted. "Sarah, in the story, when Colin starts believing he can walk, his legs get stronger, right?" "That's right." "Why do you ask?" Ethan glanced toward the door, then whispered, "Sometimes when I concentrate really hard, I think I can make my toes move. Just a little. But Dr. Whitfield says I'm imagining it." Sarah closed the book and gave Ethan her full attention. "Show me." Ethan looked terrified. "What if I can't? What if Dr. Whitfield is right and I'm just pretending? Then we'll know. But what if you can? What if everyone's been wrong?" With tremendous effort, Ethan pulled back his blanket and stared at his feet with intense concentration. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, his big toe moved. Sarah's breath caught. "Ethan, did you feel yourself do that?" "Yes." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I felt it. I really felt it." They spent the next hour testing sensation and movement. Ethan could feel light touch on his feet, temperature changes, and could produce small, voluntary movements in his toes and ankles. The responses were weak from years of disuse, but they were real. "We need to tell your daddy," Sarah said. "What if he doesn't believe me? What if Dr. Whitfield says I'm lying? Then we'll prove them wrong. But first, we need to work on making your legs stronger. Are you willing to try, even if it's hard work?" Ethan nodded with fierce determination. What neither of them knew was that Will had been standing outside the door, listening to every word. His son could move. His son could feel. 9 years of accepted medical certainty was crumbling in real time. The next morning, Will made a phone call that would change everything. "Dr. Susan Martinez. This is William Harrison. I need an independent evaluation of my son's condition, and I need absolute confidentiality until we understand what we're dealing with." Dr. Martinez was known for her unconventional approaches and willingness to challenge established diagnoses. She agreed to review Ethan's case but insisted on conducting a completely fresh evaluation, without reviewing previous medical records. "I want to see what I see," she told Will, "not what others have told me to see." Meanwhile, Sarah began incorporating subtle strengthening exercises into Ethan's daily routine. They played pirate treasure hunts that required him to reach for objects while maintaining balance. They did robot exercises, where he practiced controlling his leg movements while she supported his weight. Each session was carefully limited to prevent fatigue. But Ethan's progress was undeniable. The boy who hadn't voluntarily moved his legs in 9 years was slowly remembering that his body belonged to him. On Wednesday evening, Will found them in the garden. Sarah was kneeling beside Ethan's wheelchair as he gripped the armrests and shifted his weight forward, his face bright with concentration. "I want to touch the fountain," Ethan said through gritted teeth. The fountain was 6 feet away, an impossible distance for a child who'd been paralyzed since birth. But as Will watched, stunned, Ethan braced himself against Sarah's shoulder and took one shaking step forward, then another. His legs trembled with effort. His breathing was labored, but Ethan Harrison was walking. Will's vision blurred as he watched his son take 4 determined steps before needing to rest. 4 steps that represented 9 years of lost possibilities, of dreams abandoned, of a father who'd stopped believing in miracles. Dr. Susan Martinez arrived on a crisp November morning, her reputation for diagnostic innovation preceding her. Unlike Dr. Whitfield's formal approach, she immediately sat cross-legged on the floor to meet Ethan at eye level, winning his trust before conducting any tests. Her fresh evaluation revealed what years of documentation had obscured. Ethan's original spinal cord injury had been far less severe than recorded. The swelling and trauma from birth had caused temporary paralysis, but the actual structural damage was minimal. This is a case of learned helplessness compounded by medical pessimism, Dr. Martinez explained to Will privately. The neural pathways are intact. What we're seeing is a child who was told so consistently that he couldn't walk that his brain stopped trying to send signals to his legs. You're saying the original diagnosis was wrong? I'm saying the original diagnosis became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dr. Whitfield's documentation created a medical narrative so convincing that every subsequent doctor accepted it without independent verification. Will felt rage and relief in equal measure. 9 years. 9 years of unnecessary limitations, of watching his son accept a disability that was largely psychological. What about Dr. Whitfield? Did he know? Dr. Martinez's expression darkened. I suspect he's known for years that his initial assessment was overly pessimistic. But admitting error after so much time, with so much documentation, it would have been career-ending malpractice. The medical politics were secondary to Will's immediate concern, helping Ethan recover not just physically, but psychologically. Dr. Martinez worked with Sarah to develop a comprehensive rehabilitation plan. The physical recovery would take months of patient work. Ethan's muscles were severely weakened from disuse, and his balance and coordination needed complete retraining. More challenging was the emotional component. Ethan had to unlearn 9 years of believing he was fundamentally broken. Some days he'll make progress, Dr. Martinez warned. Other days he'll refuse to try because failure feels too dangerous. Recovery isn't linear, especially when you're rebuilding a child's entire sense of self. The prediction proved accurate. 3 days after Dr. Martinez's evaluation, Ethan had an emotional breakdown during a practice session. I can't do it, he sobbed after falling while attempting to walk between parallel bars. I'm not normal. I'm never going to be normal. Sarah held him while he cried, her own heart breaking for this brave little boy who'd carried such an enormous burden for so long. Ethan, listen to me, she said firmly. Normal is just a word grown-ups use when they're scared of anything different. You are perfect exactly as you are, and you're going to be perfect when you're walking too. Will, watching from the doorway, realized that Sarah's love for his son had become as deep and protective as any biological parent's. She wasn't just helping Ethan walk, she was helping him believe he deserved to walk. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Will found Sarah on the terrace. I need to ask you something, he said quietly. Maria's mother has recovered. Mrs. Peterson expects Maria back next week. Sarah's face fell. I see. What I'm asking is whether you'd consider staying permanently, not as a temporary therapist, but as part of our family. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to fully explore. Will, I can't stay just for Ethan. It wouldn't be fair to any of us. Then stay for me too. The confession surprised them both. Will had spent 5 years believing he'd never love anyone again, but watching Sarah love his son had reawakened feelings he'd thought died with Elizabeth. I'm falling in love with you, he admitted. With your kindness, your strength, the way you see possibilities where everyone else sees problems. I know it's complicated and I know I have no right to ask, but Sarah stepped closer, close enough that he could see starlight reflected in her eyes. It's not complicated, Will. I love Ethan like he's my own son. And I'm falling in love with you too. Winter brought both progress and setbacks. Ethan's walking improved steadily. He could now navigate short distances with minimal support. But the emotional work proved more challenging than anyone anticipated. Why didn't anyone believe me when I said I could feel my legs? Ethan asked during one of their therapy sessions, his voice carrying a burden no 9-year-old should bear. Sarah had learned that honesty, delivered with love, was the only way to help him process the magnitude of what had happened. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, she said carefully. Big mistakes that hurt people we love. Dr. Whitfield made a mistake and then other doctors believed his mistake without checking for themselves. But Daddy's smart. Why didn't he know? Will, who'd been listening from the hallway, entered the room and knelt beside his son's wheelchair. Because I was so scared of losing you that I stopped asking hard questions, he admitted. After Mommy died, the idea that you might get hurt trying to walk seemed worse than accepting that you couldn't walk at all. Ethan processed this with 9-year-old directness. So, you were protecting me? I thought I was. But I was really protecting myself from hope that might get broken. Are you scared now, when I try to walk? Will glanced at Sarah, drawing strength from her encouraging smile. Terrified, but the good kind of scared, like when you love someone so much that their happiness matters more than your fear. These conversations became crucial to Ethan's recovery. He needed to understand that the adults in his life had made mistakes born from love and fear, not malice or incompetence. Dr. Martinez monitored his progress carefully, documenting improvements that would eventually become evidence in their case against Dr. Whitfield's practice. Ethan's recovery validates something I've suspected for years, she told Will during one of their consultations. The medical community needs to be more open to re-evaluating long-standing diagnoses, especially in pediatric cases where neuroplasticity allows for dramatic improvements. Meanwhile, Sarah's role in the household evolved naturally from therapist to family member. She helped with homework, shared cooking duties with Mrs. Peterson, and became the person Ethan sought out for comfort after difficult therapy sessions. Will found himself falling deeper in love with her practical wisdom, her infectious optimism, and the way she treated Ethan not as a patient to be cured, but as a whole person deserving of respect and joy. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after Sarah's arrival, they reached a milestone none of them had dared hope for. Ethan walked independently from the living room to the Christmas tree, a distance of 20 feet. "This is the best Christmas ever," he announced, glowing with pride as he stood unassisted beside the glittering evergreen. Will agreed, but not just because of his son's physical progress. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, their house felt like a home again, filled with laughter, hope, and the kind of love that creates families from broken pieces. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep exhausted from excitement, Will found Sarah arranging presents under the tree. "There's one more gift," he said, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the size and shape of a ring box. "Before you open it," Will said, dropping to one knee, "I need you to know something. I love you not because you helped Ethan walk, though I'm grateful beyond words. I love you because you helped us both remember how to hope again." Inside the box was a simple but elegant diamond ring chosen for its classic beauty rather than its size. "Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you be Ethan's mother and my wife and help us build the family we never thought we'd have again?" Through tears of joy, Sarah whispered, "Yes." As Will slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard a small voice from the stairs. "Does this mean Sarah's going to be my mom for real now?" Ethan stood on the staircase, having walked down independently to investigate the late-night conversation. "If that's what you want," Sarah said, opening her arms to him. "That's all I wanted for Christmas," Ethan said, walking into her embrace with steady, confident steps. The legal confrontation with Dr. Whitfield began in earnest after the holidays. Will's legal team, armed with Dr. Martinez's documentation of Ethan's recovery, built a case that would reshape how pediatric neurological diagnoses were handled in Connecticut. The evidence was damning. 9 years of overly pessimistic prognosis, failure to conduct periodic reevaluations, and documented instances where Dr. Whitfield had dismissed patient reports of sensation and movement as psychological wishful thinking. Dr. Whitfield's defense team argued that his original diagnosis had been reasonable given the available information, but depositions revealed a pattern of covering up diagnostic uncertainties with false certainty. "The problem," Will's lead attorney explained, "isn't that Dr. Whitfield made an initial mistake. It's that he spent 9 years reinforcing that mistake, rather than remaining open to the possibility that he was wrong." The case attracted national attention from medical professionals concerned about diagnostic rigidity in pediatric care. Dr. Martinez testified about the difference between cautious prognosis and defeatist certainty. "Children's nervous systems are remarkably adaptable," she told the court. "By telling Ethan repeatedly that he would never walk, Dr. Whitfield created a psychological barrier that was far more limiting than his physical injury. For Ethan, the legal proceedings were confusing and sometimes frightening. He couldn't understand why adults were arguing about something that seemed obvious to him. He could walk now, so he must have been able to walk before, even if no one realized it. Sarah helped him process the complexity without burdening him with adult anger about lost years. Sometimes when people make big mistakes, other grown-ups have to decide what should happen next, she explained. But that's not your job to worry about. Your job is to keep getting stronger and being the amazing kid you are. Ethan's recovery continued throughout the spring. By his 10th birthday in March, he could walk, run, and even ride a bicycle with training wheels. His muscles were still rebuilding from years of disuse, but his determination was absolute. The birthday party, his first where he could play active games with other children, was a joyful chaos of 10-year-olds running through the mansion and gardens. Will watched his son playing tag with genuine amazement, still adjusting to the reality of Ethan's transformation. "It's like watching him be born again," he told Sarah as they supervised the celebration. "Not born again," Sarah corrected gently, "just becoming who he always was underneath." The legal case reached settlement in June. Dr. Whitfield's practice agreed to a substantial financial compensation, and more importantly, to implement new protocols for long-term pediatric cases, including mandatory periodic reevaluations by independent specialists. Will used a portion of the settlement to establish the Ethan Harrison Foundation for Pediatric Diagnostic Advocacy, providing second opinions for families dealing with complex or long-term childhood disabilities. "No other family should go through what we went through," Will announced at the foundation's launch. Every child deserves the chance to exceed expectations. Summer brought new challenges as Sarah and Will planned their wedding, while continuing to support Ethan's ongoing recovery. The physical aspects of his rehabilitation were progressing beautifully, but the psychological work remained complex. "Sometimes I get angry," Ethan confided to Sarah during one of their evening talks. "Not at you or Daddy, but at all the time I lost. All the things I could have been doing if people had believed me." Sarah recognized this as a crucial stage in his emotional healing. Anger was healthy. It meant Ethan was processing the magnitude of what had been taken from him. "Being angry is okay," she assured him. "You lost 9 years of running and jumping and playing like other kids. That's worth being angry about. But I don't want to be angry forever." "You won't be. Anger is like having a splinter. It hurts until you get it out, but once it's gone, you feel better." Will struggled with his own complex emotions about Ethan's recovery. Joy at his son's progress warred with guilt about the lost years and rage at the medical system that had failed them. "I keep thinking about all the milestones we missed," he told Sarah one evening as they watched Ethan practice soccer in the garden. His first steps, learning to ride a bike, playing sports with friends. How do I forgive myself for accepting that he'd never have those experiences? "You can't change the past," Sarah said firmly. "But you can make sure his future is everything it should be. Besides, look at him now. Does he look like a boy who's missing anything?" Ethan was indeed thriving. His infectious joy at discovering physical capabilities drew other children to him like a magnet. He'd made 3 close friends from his tutoring group, all of whom were fascinated by his story and impressed by his determination. Dr. Martinez continued monitoring his progress, documenting recovery that exceeded even her optimistic projections. "Ethan's case will be studied for years," she told them during a follow-up appointment. "His neuroplasticity and psychological resilience are remarkable. But more than that, his recovery demonstrates the importance of believing in possibilities." As their August wedding approached, Will and Sarah faced the delicate task of explaining to Ethan how their family dynamic would change. "You know Sarah and I love each other, right?" Will asked during one of their father-son conversations. "Duh, Daddy. You smile all the time now, just like in the pictures with Mommy. How do you feel about Sarah becoming your stepmom officially?" Ethan considered this seriously. "Will she still read me bedtime stories? Every night if you want. Will she still help me with my walking exercises? Absolutely. Will she love me even if I have bad days or get in trouble?" Will's throat tightened with emotion. "Forever and always, buddy. That's what moms do." Ethan grinned. "Then I think it's perfect. Besides, I've been calling her mom in my head for months anyway." The wedding took place in their garden on a perfect August afternoon, with Ethan serving as best man and ring bearer. Sarah wore Elizabeth's pearl necklace, a gift Will offered, and she accepted as a symbol that love expands rather than replaces. Dr. Martinez was among the 100 guests, beaming with professional and personal pride at Ethan's complete recovery. The boy who'd been written off as permanently disabled walked confidently down the aisle, carrying rings they'd chosen together as a family. Mrs. Peterson, now officially the head of household rather than Ethan's primary caregiver, wept openly as she watched the family she'd helped hold together finally become whole again. "In 5 years of working for this family," she told Sarah before the ceremony, "I never saw them truly happy until you arrived. You've given them back their capacity for joy." Will's wedding toast reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "A year ago, I thought I understood love," he said, looking at Sarah radiant in simple white silk and Ethan glowing with pride beside them. "I thought it was about protection, about providing security, about keeping the people you care about safe from disappointment. Sarah taught me that real love is about believing in possibilities, especially when they seem impossible." The reception lasted until sunset, with Ethan dancing enthusiastically with his new mother and running around the garden with his friends in a way that still amazed every adult who remembered his years in a wheelchair. As guests departed, Will found Sarah and Ethan on the terrace, both still in their wedding clothes, looking up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Ethan asked with 10-year-old curiosity about the future. "Now we live happily ever after," Sarah said simply. "We keep helping other kids like you. Daddy builds amazing things with his company, and we have adventures together as a family." "What kind of adventures?" "All kinds. Disney World, camping trips, teaching you to drive when you're older, maybe giving you a little brother or sister to keep up with." Ethan's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? A baby?" Will and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing that their family was indeed ready to grow. "Someday," Will promised. "When the time is right." As they walked inside together, Will, Sarah, and Ethan, the three of them were no longer a broken father and disabled son being cared for by a kind stranger. They were a family built from healing, hope, and the radical belief that love could overcome any obstacle. 2 years later, the Harrison family had settled into a rhythm of beautiful normalcy. Ethan, now 12 and completely indistinguishable from any other active preteen, played on his school's soccer team and had recently started taking piano lessons at his own request. Sarah, now officially Sarah Harrison, and 6 months pregnant with their second child, had completed her nursing degree through a part-time program designed for working mothers. Will had been surprisingly supportive of her career goals, understanding that her need to help others was part of what made her who she was. The Ethan Harrison Foundation had helped over 200 families secure second opinions for complex pediatric diagnoses, resulting in modified treatments for 37 children and complete diagnostic revisions for 12 cases similar to Ethan's. "We're not just changing individual lives, Dr. Martinez told them during the Foundation's second annual gala. "We're changing how the medical community approaches long-term pediatric care." Dr. Whitfield's practice had never recovered from the scandal. He'd retired early, his reputation destroyed by revelations about other cases where his pessimistic certainty had potentially limited children's recovery prospects. For Ethan, the lawsuit and its aftermath had become ancient history, less important than his current concerns about middle school, soccer playoffs, and whether his baby sister, they'd learned the gender at Sarah's last ultrasound, would be as athletic as he was turning out to be. "Mom," he said one evening as Sarah helped him with math homework, "do you think the baby will have any problems like I did?" Sarah set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "Every baby is different, sweetheart. But if she does have challenges, we'll handle them together. And she'll have the best big brother in the world to show her that anything is possible. I'd tell her that doctors sometimes make mistakes, but that doesn't mean you should stop trying." "That's exactly right." Will, listening from the doorway, marveled at how completely Ethan had integrated his early experience into a philosophy of resilience rather than bitterness. His son had learned lessons about perseverance and possibility that most adults never mastered. That weekend, they attended a foundation event where Ethan met other children whose diagnoses had been successfully challenged. A 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy who'd exceeded all movement predictions. A teenage boy with autism who'd learned to speak after years of being considered nonverbal. Twins with muscular dystrophy who'd maintained mobility far longer than expected. It's like a club of kids who proved doctors wrong, Ethan observed as they drove home. The best kind of club, Sarah agreed. Will watched his son in the rearview mirror, still sometimes amazed by the confident, athletic boy Ethan had become. 12 years old, captain of his soccer team, honor roll student, protective older brother to an unborn sister, and one of the most emotionally mature people Will had ever known. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, "I want to be a doctor when I grow up." "Really? What kind of doctor?" "The kind who listens to kids when they say something feels different. The kind who believes in possibilities." Sarah reached over and squeezed Will's hand, both of them recognizing that their son's greatest achievement wasn't learning to walk. It was learning to transform his experience into a mission to help others. Elizabeth Grace Harrison was born on a snowy February morning, screaming with healthy indignation and moving all 4 limbs with beautiful, normal vigor. Ethan, now 13 and protective beyond his years, had insisted on being the first person besides his parents to hold his sister. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully supporting her tiny head as he'd been taught. "And she's going to be so fast when she learns to walk." Sarah, exhausted but radiant, watched her son, in every way that mattered, bond with his sister with the kind of fierce love that would protect her from ever feeling alone or different. "She's lucky to have you as a big brother," Will said, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his family expand with a love he'd never thought possible. The first year of Elizabeth's life brought new challenges and deeper joy. Ethan threw himself into big brother duties with characteristic determination, reading to her, helping with feeding, and providing running commentary on her development. "Look, Mom, she's trying to grab my finger. Her reflexes are excellent," he announced during one of Elizabeth's tummy time sessions, his enthusiasm making Sarah laugh with pure happiness. Will found himself experiencing fatherhood differently the second time around. With Ethan, his early years had been overshadowed by medical concerns and grief. With Elizabeth, he could simply enjoy each milestone without the weight of tragedy coloring every moment. The foundation continued to grow, now operating in 3 states, and partnering with major medical centers to implement protocols for diagnostic reevaluation. Ethan had become their unofficial spokesperson, appearing at events with an articulate confidence that inspired both families and medical professionals. "I want other kids to know that being different doesn't mean being less," he told a conference of pediatric specialists when he was 14. "And I want doctors to know that kids can feel things even when tests say they can't." His speech received a standing ovation from an audience that included Dr. Martinez, who had become not just their medical advocate but a family friend. On Ethan's 15th birthday, Sarah found him in the garden where he'd taken those first miraculous steps 7 years earlier. He was taller now, lean and athletic, but she could still see traces of the serious 9-year-old who'd once believed he was broken beyond repair. "Thinking about anything special?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench that faced the fountain. "Just remembering," Ethan said. "Not the sad parts, but the good parts. Like when you first sat next to me at dinner and made everything feel possible again." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them all together. "You know what I remember most?" she said. "The first time you smiled. Really smiled. I knew right then that you were going to be okay, and that we were all going to be okay." Ethan leaned against her shoulder, still willing to accept comfort from the woman who'd saved his family in every way that mattered. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for teaching me that love is the most powerful medicine in the world." 5 years later, Dr. Ethan Harrison graduated summa cum laude from Stanford University with a pre-med degree and a full scholarship to Harvard Medical School. At 20, he'd become an advocate for patient-centered medicine and diagnostic humility, speaking at conferences about the importance of listening to patients, especially young patients, who reported experiences that didn't match medical expectations. Sarah, now Dr. Sarah Harrison herself, with a doctorate in pediatric nursing, had become the foundation's clinical director. Together, she and Ethan had developed protocols for patient experience integration that were being adopted by hospitals nationwide. Will, at 54, had stepped back from day-to-day business operations to focus on the foundation and spend more time with his family. Elizabeth, now 5 and as energetic as her brother had been once he started walking, showed no signs of any medical issues, but had inherited both parents' determination and her brother's protective instincts. The family spent Ethan's graduation weekend in California, celebrating not just his academic achievement, but the completion of a journey that had begun 11 years earlier in a Greenwich dining room. "I keep thinking about that night you first sat next to me," Ethan told Sarah during the graduation dinner. "Did you know then? Did you know I could walk?" "I knew you could do anything you set your mind to," Sarah replied. Walking was just the beginning. Dr. Martinez, now in her 70s but still practicing, had flown in for the graduation. She'd become the family's unofficial grandmother, documenting Ethan's recovery for medical literature while providing the kind of unwavering support that had made everything possible. "You know," she told them during a quiet moment at the celebration, "Ethan's case changed how I practice medicine. Not just because of the diagnostic implications, but because it reminded me that healing is about more than fixing what's broken. It's about unleashing what was always possible." That evening, as the family walked across Stanford's campus under the California stars, Will reflected on the miraculous journey that had transformed them from a broken father and disabled son into a thriving family united by love, hope, and the absolute belief in human possibility. "What's next?" Elizabeth asked with 5-year-old curiosity, skipping between her parents while Ethan walked beside them, every step a testament to the power of refusing to accept limitations. "Medical school for Ethan," Sarah said. "Kindergarten for you. More families to help through the foundation, and adventures we haven't even imagined yet." "But we'll have them together?" Elizabeth asked. "Always together," Will promised, looking at his wife and children. The family that had been built not from what was, but from what could be when love meets determination. Ethan Harrison, who'd once believed he was broken beyond repair, was about to become Dr. Ethan Harrison, dedicated to ensuring that no child would ever again be told that their dreams were impossible. His story had become not just a medical miracle, but a testament to the transformative power of believing in possibilities, especially when the world insists they don't exist. And in a garden in Greenwich, Connecticut, a fountain still sparkled in the moonlight, marking the spot where a boy took his first steps toward a future that had once seemed impossible, and where a family learned that the greatest miracles happen not when everything goes right, but when love refuses to accept that anything is permanently wrong. The end.